to give folks a minute to uh, get settled and join the webinar session. So we'll start in just a minute, and thanks for joining us. All right. Thanks again for making time to join Evergreen and our great guest today to talk about the climate pollution reduction grants and the exciting announcement that the Biden-Harris administration made earlier this week. And we're really thrilled to have everyone here. Thanks again to our panel for joining. My name is Justin Ballack. I'm the state program director here at Evergreen, leading our engagement with governors and state agencies and state advocates on the ground to, in part, maximize the benefits of federal climate investments to make sure that all the historic levels of climate investment that are being seeded by the Biden-Harris administration are being deployed equitably and effectively on the ground. So we're really thrilled to be partnering with so many folks to maximize the impact of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants program, and really appreciate the time that everyone's made on our panel to be here speaking with everybody today. So we'll do some intros and we'll get started. We'll kick it off by just talking about all the brilliant speakers that have taken the time out of their day to join us. I'll start with Kara Cook. Kara is the state of Michigan's chief climate and energy strategist. She's been a great leader in the Whitmer administration and a great partner for us and others in the climate movement, helping implement the state's Michigan Healthy Climate Plan to achieve 100% carbon neutrality by 2050. And previously, she served as chief of staff at the Michigan Department of the Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. And she's also been a senior advisor to Governor Gretchen Whitmer on climate policy. And over the past 5.5 years that she's been in the administration, she's helped lead on any number of fronts, but in particular, recently, we were thrilled to work with her. And Kara, thanks so much for your leadership, getting the groundbreaking 100% clean legislation passed among the other components of that package, which is a really historic deal. Thanks again for being here. And last thing on Kara, before joining the Whitmer administration, she worked in government affairs at the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. Thanks again for joining, Kara. Next up, we have Jessica Shirley, who currently is serving as the acting secretary for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. And in that role, she is guiding the department in its mission to protect and preserve Pennsylvania's environment. Jessica has also served many other roles inside the department. Secretary Shirley previously has been Deputy Secretary, Infrastructure Implementation Coordinator, and the Policy Director. She has extensive experience developing a suite of initiatives and executive actions, allocating federal money, really has worked within the DEP for a long time in Pennsylvania on any number of issues to move the Commonwealth forward. Thank you so much for being here. The other thing I want to note about Secretary Shirley is, as far as I can tell, she is the most senior state government official to take the Evergreen IRA personality quiz. And that was one of the first things that she mentioned to us when we started working with her. So thank you again for your
part. I loved it. I was like, that's so creative. Thank you so much, Justin. I'm really happy to be here to talk about CPRG and the IRA personality quiz that I am says that I am an environmental justice and a climate change personality.
Great. Thank you, Secretary, for being here. And we now have Ali Zaidi, who's also joined. Ali really needs no introduction, but we'll do one anyway. And he has led the White House Climate Policy Office, coordinating the Biden-Harris administration's all-of-government approach to tackling the climate crisis, leading efforts across the administration, the whole-of-government approach that this administration is deploying so well and so effectively to set the national target to cut greenhouse gas pollution in half by 2030, deliver robust executive actions, and again, why we're here today, securing the largest legislative wins on climate in U.S. history through both the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. Ali joined the Biden-Harris administration after serving in the state of New York as Deputy Secretary for Energy and Environment. In that capacity, he led New York's efforts to equitably tackle climate change and also held multiple key positions in the Obama-Biden administration. Ali, thanks so much for being here and joining us.
Grateful to be here. And as just a hat tip to Jessica, I've got the state of Pennsylvania here on my wall, if you can see it. I work for New York, but I will always be from Erie County, Pennsylvania.
Thanks for being here.
No
And I'm a Philly guy, no offense to Michigan, which we also love, but it's a Pennsylvania crowd today too. Last introduction we'll go through. Rachel Patterson is an Evergreener. She's the state policy advisor here at Evergreen on our state's team and has worked on policy in the areas of climate, energy, clean transportation, and environmental justice. She's led at Evergreen our recent work here alongside partners, RMI and Climate Exchange, to analyze every single state CPRG plan, and excited to hear her talk more about that, the priority climate action plans that states developed as part of this process. Before she joined Evergreen, she was at the Environmental Advocates of New York, and she's also served as an Excelsior Fellow for NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and also as a senior briefer in the New York Governor's Office. She's also pursuing a JD at Albany Law School and serving as an adjunct faculty member at Columbia. Rachel, thanks so much for being here. Glad to have you on the panel. All right. Before we dive in, we're going to dive into our panel here in a second. Just wanted to do a quick housekeeping note. We're going to spend the next half hour of this event hearing from these great folks on the panel, our esteemed speakers, and then we're going to save 10 minutes or so at the end for Q&A from the audience. If you want to ask a question, try to think of your question ahead of time and enter it in the Q&A icon at the bottom specifically. So we're asking folks to use the Q&A rather than the chat, and we'll try to get it answered for you and try and think of your questions and enter them while we're going through the speaking program here. So Ali, if we can start with you, I think we have to start by, in this week in particular, just noting how much we appreciate the leadership of both President Biden and Vice President Harris and their commitment, which is really felt throughout the administration, to consistently work to use every tool possible, leave no stone unturned in tackling the climate crisis. And you've led that work and seen it up close. And there's a whole suite of historic things we could talk about. Here, we're talking about the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program, the big announcement that Administrator Regan and the EPA got to make earlier this week. Wondering if you could just set the table for us. Why is this program important? And then the other thing that I would love to hear your perspective on specifically is, as a former state climate official, like the folks on the panel here, one of the things that we always talk about at Evergreen is the baton passing that's continuously going between the state and the federal government. And there's so many things in the IRA that were inspired by things that happened at the state level, green banks, et cetera. The list could go on for quite a while. And now the CPRG program is really helping incubate the next wave of state innovation. So we'd love to hear you talk about that. And then more broadly, what's important about this announcement? What are your thoughts on CPRG? And we'll turn it over to you. Thanks again for joining.
Great. Well, thank you to Evergreen, who have been just, I think, such great thought partners, not just in the implementation journey, which is where we are now, but frankly, in the development and design of the agenda in the first place. We're really, really grateful for your leadership. When you look at the climate pollution reduction grants, you can see the fingerprints of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's very personal experience in climate and clean energy and in public service, really all across the design of this stuff. Both the president and vice president have served at the local level. They've served in statewide office, and of course now they're serving all 50 states. And I think in that journey, it's something that you see them bring to the conversation every time we're gathered, whether it's in the Roosevelt Room or in the Oval. This focus on how we do everything we can to provide tools to empower that partnership, not just implementation partnership, as we have with programs that flow through the states and local governments, but really a full and complete partnership where state and local governments can innovate, they can pioneer, they can imagine for themselves, and in the process, they can set up a race to the top on climate. And that's what this program really helps us do, is help in every single sector of the economy find ways to get resources to the folks on the ground who want to push the envelope on what is possible. And really, I think the premise behind this grant program in particular is there's no pollution in our communities that we have to settle for. Every ton of greenhouse gas emission has a solution on the other side. It's just about getting the right team together and getting them the resources to do the job. One of the interesting aspects of CPRG is that it mirrors the Biden-Harris administration's focus on looking at every sector of the economy. So you have grantees that are taking on pollution in the agriculture sector, in heavy industry, steel, cement, aluminum, landfills, folks who are taking on pollution reduction in buildings and delivering at the same time utility bill savings for consumers, folks that are accelerating progress in the electricity sector, in transportation. And in each of those, what you see the CPRG grantees do is take on what for decades has been dismissed as too hard to abate. I think about the heavy duty part of transportation, 5% of the vehicles on the road, 20% of the pollution. And when you go to our environmental justice communities, the folks who represent people in neighborhoods along those highways and busy intersections, it's not just 20% of the problem. It's a big part of what's going into the lungs of our kids. And this is an opportunity to accelerate progress there. So, you know, Governor Inslee, who's become a friend in some of this work, and I know is a friend to you, often refers to state and local governments as supranational. I went with the vice president to COP28, and you know, those conversations at the international stage often are dominated by countries, but increasingly they are conversations among supranationals as well, who are doing the pioneering work. And you know, as the U.S. National Climate Advisor, I couldn't be more excited about the contributions of supranationals as we don't just achieve our nationally determined contribution, hopefully we overachieve it and deliver jobs and justice at the same time.
Thanks so much for that. It's also, to your point, about the need to just get the smart team together, really heartening to see how much demand there was for this program. On the one hand, there were, you know, some applications that couldn't get funded, but on the other hand, it's really heartening to see that there are $30 billion in excess, I think, of $30 billion for $4.5 billion worth of funding. And that just shows how much pent-up energy there is at the state and local level to move the ball forward and help the country meet its climate commitments in a community-driven and equitable way. And yes, we're big Governor Inslee fans here, and glad to hear that you got to talk to him recently about some of these pieces. So we know that you can't stay with us for the whole time. So and thanks again for making time for this, Sully. Just another question we wanted to touch on with this program in particular, really drill down further on environmental justice, equity, community-driven solutions. So far, we know that there's more coming later for tribes and territories in particular, but so far with this implementation competition, we've seen 25 applications selected by EPA for funding. The Biden-Harris administration, as we've talked about already, has made equity a core component of the approach to tackling the climate crisis with the Justice 40 initiative. And was wondering if you could touch on, as you're thinking about the implementation grants, we're kind of just at the starting line in some ways. Obviously, EPA has been working on this for a long time, but now the states and localities have to actually execute on these grants on the ground. Can you just share your thoughts on how the implementation grants are going to put Justice 40 into action, and how the administration, the Biden-Harris administration, is going to be able to work with award recipients to ensure that they have the support to turn this commitment into reality as these awards move from award stage to execution and implementation?
Yeah. Look, I think environmental justice is absolutely central to this task. I remember early days of the administration, the president got us together. Gino was still here, and he said, you know, I didn't hire you guys to be greenhouse gas accountants. And if we are only successful in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we will not have been successful in the ultimate task. And when you look at the scoreboard now, over 300,000 clean energy jobs created under this president, places that had seen highways tear through communities now reconnecting them, stitch projects being funded, places that had seen redlining devastate communities that are now literally hotter today because there's more pavement, fewer trees, getting canopy, getting the investment that they need. That's him following through, and the vice president following through on that broad vision. What CPRG does, I think, is turbocharge that broad view of what it looks like to win in meeting this moment. And, you know, I think about, for example, the grant to Connecticut, where it's not just about deploying heat pumps, it's about making sure that those heat pumps are a solution that are available in multifamily and low-income housing. And it's about bringing together the necessary partnerships across the entire Northeast, really, to make that progress possible. I think about the grants to southern coastal communities in Alaska, where it's not just the state government, but it's really 50 communities with engagement with indigenous people, helping lead that transformation away from burning residential oil to shifting to more efficient and cleaner solutions. I think about, you know, what folks are doing as a result of this, what we'll be able to do in places like New Orleans and in Denver, again, bringing together really broad coalitions so that everybody wins. You know, I often like to say that the most important topic in the climate change conversation is power. And people often think I'm about to start talking about electricity and poles and wires and generation. But what I think is the most central conversation is who has the power to drive the change, who has the power to draw up the plans, who has the power to get the economic upside, who will benefit. It's not just about putting steel in the ground, it's about putting steel in the spine of the American middle class. I was in Pennsylvania last week, met with machinists in York who are making the hydropower technology that's going to help us reduce greenhouse gas on the grid. I met with young people in Berks and in Philly who are producing food through more sustainable systems of production. reducing emissions, but also increasing a sense of investedness for folks. I was with Kara and the governor in Michigan just last month in communities that we went to one where they had seen a coal plant go away. I met with the IBEW workers and the local community folks who are now have that site as the site for the largest storage facility in the Midwest. This is about power, it's about purpose, it's about place, it's about feeling that progress, and that's what CPRG, I think, turbocharges. It's not just about reducing the pollution, it's about bringing all the people up to be able to get the benefit, and that's really at the heart of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris's vision for how we tackle the climate crisis.
So appreciate that. So appreciate your reminder, what you said earlier, that to not just look at tons and accounting, but also people. And we're going to get to Pennsylvania's grant in a little bit, but it was got a chance to be at the announcement on Monday with the governor and Administrator Regan, and it was great to have leaders of the AFL-CIO there saying that pollution is not going to be our legacy anymore, and talking about the jobs that were going to come from that program. And just so appreciate your the way that the president and the vice president are thinking about the climate agenda and their approach to tackling the climate crisis, that it's really about people at the end of the day in communities. So we know that you have to drop in a minute, but just wanted to give you the chance to say any final remarks, and just please pass on the entire community's thanks to the president and the vice president for everything they're doing. We're grateful for your leadership and your team in particular, not only with this program, but all that the team is doing to continue to run through the tape and drive forward on the whole of government climate agenda. And we'll give you the chance to offer any final thoughts before we say goodbye to you.
Yeah, look, Sunday was a really significant day. It was the hottest day in the history of the world ever recorded. And, I say that a little jokingly because there are other things going on Sunday. But here's the deal. I mean, we are living in a world where young people have gotten used to the sky turning orange. They've gotten used to breathing smoke into their lungs. They've gotten used to the horror of getting push alerts on their phone that another hurricane, another flood, another fire has ripped through communities where people they care about live. That's a busted sense of normal. That is fuel for hopelessness and despair. The folks that have come together in coalition to apply for the CPRG, to pull down on the resources from the Biden-Harris administration's historic investment agenda, they are mounting the most important response, and that is the response of how we deploy the solutions that generate a sense of hopefulness and progress and possibilities. That's what Jessica, that's what Kara, that's what all of the states and local governments that have received these resources are positioned to do. And our job is not just to support them with our wonky ideas, but also be their boombox to lift up their successes, because that is the antidote to the moment. We cannot let the same folks who paid for climate denial and delay now drown us with skepticism and despair. We got to fight back with solutions and a sense of hopefulness that's grounded in real progress. So grateful to be with you, Justin. So grateful for the leadership at Evergreen. We count Maggie Thomas here in the Climate Policy Office as one of our great coups to steal her from Evergreen. But Sam, Leah, all of you guys, Jamal, I think you guys have just really helped us think through some critical steps along the way. So we're very grateful.
Thank you so much for being here, and we'd be remiss if we're doing the Evergreen alumni shout
And
outs
Becca.
to Ellison in the vice president's office
That's
also.
right. That's
Uh,
right. That's
Thank
right.
you for your leadership. Thanks for being here. Good to be with you.
Take care.
All right. Thank you to Ali. And we're going to dive right into the rest of our panels. We're going to start with our panelists. Rachel is our resident CPRG expert extraordinaire on the Evergreen team. So because you've been leading this collaboration that we've been engaged in with RMI and Climate Exchange, again, thank them for their partnership. Can you help us drill down? We're going to take the charge of the admin and not be greenhouse and the president and the vice president and really think about the people and on the ground impacts. Can you help us understand exactly what's being funded here? What are we talking about in concrete terms?
Yeah, sure. And I think most people here are aware of this, but I'm just going to start from the beginning. CPRG was split into two parts, right? There was a planning phase and then an implementation phase. And in that planning phase, states, municipalities, tribes, and territories were all able to receive funding for plans to reduce emissions, to really that critical planning component. And then those who submitted plans were able to apply for the implementation funds. And we saw 45 states, along with Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., submit these plans. And the goal of this program was for those plans to be driven by the needs of the state, which we saw reflected in what was submitted. We saw a very different approach to planning processes. Some states like Kansas submitted over 30 different strategies, while some states like Washington, D.C. submitted fewer than 10, right? But what we did see was that across the board, all of the highest polluting sectors were addressed. So nearly every single priority climate action plan addressed transportation. Every single priority climate action plan did address buildings, and many of them addressed electricity as well. And as Ali mentioned, we also saw folks addressing things that have historically been considered hard to abate that we know that there are solutions for, like industrial decarbonization or agriculture. And so, like I said, the exciting part of this is that states really got to craft their own vision for how to address emissions reduction that would work for their state. And to your point, Justin, you know, what's exciting there is that means that they can shape and craft jobs the way they need to, address disadvantaged and historically overburdened communities in the way that they need to. And so now we saw out of over 300 applications, 25 of them have received funding. And how that's shaken out at the state level is 13 states and state coalitions have received some of this funding. And so I know that we have Pennsylvania and Michigan on here, which are some of my favorite applications that we were really excited to see funded. But I'm just going to go over a couple of the other ones that we saw, just so that folks can get a variety and a little highlight of the variety that was funded. So we saw some states address a wide variety of sectors in their plans. So Illinois, for example, got funded, and they took a holistic approach in order to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and their own state targets to have 100% carbon-free power by 2045. They're going to address the building sector, industry, vehicles and freight, as well as agriculture and fossil fuel retirement. And they'll do this in some cases by providing incentives to transition to cleaner technologies, by providing workforce and training opportunities and technical assistance, and job opportunities that will target low-income and disadvantaged communities. We also saw on the city level, New Orleans got funded for their, again, holistic approach that will address transportation, building emissions, clean energy, and urban forestry, right? So we see that cities and states get to shape the programs to the needs of their emission reductions capacities. And in New Orleans, that transportation will be less freight heavy like Illinois, and will focus more on addressing disadvantaged communities through things like micromobility. And they'll address urban heat island effect through planting over 7,000 trees and incentivize solar adoption at a local level. So, and then we also see some cities and states focus specifically on one sector. So in King County, Washington, their application was funded on a single sector, and it'll reduce emissions from buildings, specifically multifamily and small commercial buildings, through electrification and weatherization and heat pump installation. So that's really exciting. And then we saw coalitions, which we were really supportive of. Coalitions can be a great opportunity to set the bar for what regional collaboration looks like and benefit, obviously, more than one state in the process. And so one of those, as a transportation nerd, one of the coalition applications I was particularly excited to see was New Jersey's, which will cover a number of Northeast states, including Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, and they'll deploy medium and heavy duty vehicle infrastructure along Route I-95. And even as someone who lives in New York, as we all know, pollution does not stay in one place. So even other states like New York and neighboring states will benefit from this. And through this program, they plan to train over 400 workers to make this happen. So that's really exciting that we're going to be able to see some tangible benefits for communities. And then I'd be remiss not to name the one tribal applicant that was awarded funds. Justin, as you mentioned, of course, tribes and territories had their own competition, but the Nez Perce tribe was awarded in competition, in the general competition, which was really exciting because this covers Idaho and Oregon, but it'll focus on reducing emissions through residential energy efficiency retrofits, scaling up renewable energy, and developing EV networks. And the goal of that will really be to allow decentralized power systems to support community resilience on the community scale and on the individual scale through those housing improvements. So we can really see that while the money hasn't gone out the door yet, it is going to tangibly provide some benefits for a whole host of residents in a variety of states.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And thank you for the work that you've been doing with our partners to pour through literally thousands of pages of state climate plans and take out really important information that's benefiting both policymakers and advocates and community members around the country. You can look for some of those materials. We'll drop them in the chat, and we'll keep going. We're gonna go from the broad strokes to start drilling down into some of the specifics with our other guests here. So Kara, let's go to Michigan. The Biden-Harris administration just awarded $129 million roughly to help you all build out more wind and solar and clean energy projects, to meet the 60% renewable energy and 100% clean targets that you recently set last year in state law, which you and your team and the governor obviously had a huge leadership role in designing and passing. Can you just give us a sense of, in practical terms, what does this funding mean for Michigan residents and communities? How is this grant going to help you meet the targets that were set in law last year?
Thanks, Justin, and everyone. I'm so excited to talk about this funding coming home to Michigan. I do want to start by just thanking the Biden-Harris administration again for really leading on this program, and of course, our hardworking congressional delegation for getting it across the finish line. We are so excited to be one of just 25 applications that was funded in this really competitive program, because as you just heard from Rachel, there were just an incredible amount of programs across the country, many of which did not get funded. But, we're really happy that we've been a top state across the board in bringing home climate and clean energy dollars from the Investing in America agenda home to Michigan. We intend to keep it that way. Federal funding has really changed the game in Michigan for what we're able to do, not only on climate, but growing our broader manufacturing and clean energy economy. This really goes back to the governor's approach and many of our cabinet members' approach of, very similar to what you just heard from Ali, kind of this all of government approach to addressing climate action. I've heard both Governor Whitmer as well as Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist often say that they want to see Michigan as the arsenal of decarbonization. Just like we were the arsenal of democracy during World War II, we obviously put the world on wheels given our focus on the auto sector. We now have the opportunity to not only look at what we can do to meet our state climate goals, which I'll talk a little bit about, but make sure that we're actually manufacturing what other states, other communities, countries, and tribes need to meet their decarbonization goals. So I think we have this incredible opportunity thanks to federal funding, and we're so excited about the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. But, our application really started with the development of Governor Whitmer's My Healthy Climate Plan, the state's roadmap to 100% decarbonization by 2050 that she released back in 2022. That plan set a really ambitious goal because we only had about 15% renewable energy online when we published the plan of 60% renewable energy by 2030. And then, as you mentioned, Justin, last year, the governor signed some really landmark pieces of law, one that created a 100% clean energy standard by 2040, but also a 60% renewable energy standard by 2035. So we've got both goals and standards that we're looking to meet here in Michigan. We always want to exceed where we can. So since the release of the climate plan, we've been really aggressive, particularly in our electric sector, because it is the highest, kind of climate polluting sector that we have in Michigan, on figuring out how we can remove every barrier possible to deploying clean and renewable energy resources. And this has been everything from, that package of laws that we talked about, that I just talked about just a second ago, with new clean energy standards, as well as reforms on siting and permitting for renewable energy, to trying to bring a nuclear plant back online, and so much more. And we've really focused on siting and kind of removing those barriers, because what we've seen is, obviously focusing on the electric sector is going to allow us to enable deeper decarbonization across our full economy. But it's really the number one barrier that we face in being able to meet our electric goals, is really challenges to siting and permitting, particularly at the local level. So our work and our CPRG application had a really strong focus on this, because we need to be able to build wind, solar, storage, other clean energy technologies at the scope and scale necessary to meet our climate goals and kind of the global climate crisis. But going back to the award, our application was put together by the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. We often call it EAGLE, so I'm going to use that acronym moving forward. But specifically our Office of Climate and Energy, which is run by Corey Connolly. And that team just did an incredible job of over a year of stakeholder engagement to try to make sure that we had a really clear understanding of what everyone across the state, after years of engagement already on our climate plan, what they wanted us to focus on as we looked at these transformational opportunities. And because of their, really collaborative approach, we ended up with this, I think, fantastic application that we're so happy that was awarded, where we had support from everybody from heavy industry to our utilities, to environmental groups and organized labor. So we really built a really strong coalition around getting this across the finish line. So our award really focuses on 5 strategies to meet our 60% renewable energy goal by 2030, as outlined in the climate plan. The first, it expands a program that we launched last year as a pilot with some state general fund called the Renewable Ready Communities Program. And that program is going to provide incentives to communities that choose to host renewable energy projects, particularly large scale or utility scale projects, on top of the other benefits that they're already going to get through community benefit agreements or tax revenue or any other number of things, making sure that there's really clear benefits, not only for them hosting this, but dollars that they can use to support other essential services and projects within their community. The second piece of our award focuses on a new pilot to incentivize the siting of renewables on kind of industrial sites and brownfield sites. So these really hard to use sites. We want to make sure that every community can benefit from this, not just our suburban and rural communities that have easier land to develop on, and that we're really revitalizing sites across the state. Then we expanded our services and technical assistance for local governments, because siting renewable energy and bringing these projects online is not easy. So we want to make sure that they have as many resources as possible on top of those financial incentives to get this done. And our fourth strategy, I'm trying to make sure I'm covering all of them. We wanted to make sure that we had the workforce available to, build these projects and then fill those in-demand, high-paying jobs in the clean energy sector into the future. So we're going to be partnering with our Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity to expand Michigan's workforce programs, particularly focused on Department of Labor registered apprenticeships and other things that really follow true good jobs principles. And then last but not least, we wanted to make sure that we had a comprehensive plan moving forward, so we know how we're going to meet that 60% renewable energy goal. So we're developing a strategic plan, and that's something that we're going to be working with different communities to get feedback on. A few other notes on the program that I think made it successful and that we're really excited about. We really tried to figure out every opportunity to braid both state funding and federal funding, because these dollars are incredible. $129 million is a lot of money, but it's not enough to make sure that every single community is going to need, receive the benefits of these types of programs. So we're really looking at braiding every dollar that we can find. And then, this was something that Ali mentioned, but we want to make sure that this is really focused on the communities that need it most and the communities that haven't seen as much development or as much of the benefits of clean energy previously. An example of this in our program is we set aside $10 million of the award explicitly to make sure that those dollars are going to benefit our 12 federally recognized tribes in Michigan. And I guess just as an aside there, Michigan is obviously committed to not only meeting the Justice 40 goals that were set by the Biden and Harris administration, but we are consistently exceeding them in our programs around climate and water. And we're looking to see what else we can do to make sure that we are really equitably deploying funding across the board. But all of the program details aside, again, CPRG is going to be really transformational on climate, particularly from a greenhouse gas emissions. But this is so much more about what the actual benefits are going to be for communities. This is going to create incredible opportunities for new revenue for our local governments, allowing them to invest in their communities, provide programs that they need. And that's everything from rebuilding their roads to making sure that they have police services and everything in between. It's creating good paying union jobs right now into the future, ensuring that we keep those workers here. It's protecting our public health, our land, air, and water, and particularly our Great Lakes here in Michigan. And then it's about lowering costs for residents, which is the number one thing that we hear over and over, lowering costs and making sure that we have a reliable energy grid. We can make sure that we're deploying the cheapest form of energy. We're going to be able to meet all of those kind of basic needs as we move forward and address our broader climate plan. So, I think we have a huge opportunity with these resources. We're really excited already to start on implementation of this program. Our Office of Climate and Energy is ready to get these dollars out the door and start more public engagement on how we implement the My Healthy Climate Plan. And I guess I want to just end with saying, our Office of Climate and Energy often has this motto of to fix everything, we need everyone. And that's something that we've adopted at the state level. And it's something that, makes our public engagement and stakeholder engagement so important to Governor Whitmer and our full administration. But that's something that I think would be good for everybody to take away from today's discussion.
Thank you so much for that, Kara. Really exciting to hear about your plans to help have federal funding help achieve a state standard and goal. It's one of the things that we've been excited about, the promise of CPRG from the get-go. The other thing that we've really been excited about in terms of the promise of this program in particular is the ability to help states really develop innovative approaches to tackle really challenging sectors. In Pennsylvania this week, Secretary Shirley, you're getting $396 million to help create jobs and reduce climate impacts in the industrial sector, which is the largest source of pollution. Can you tell us a little bit more about what this means for Pennsylvania residents, workers, in concrete terms, pun intended?
Absolutely. So first, I just want to say, thank you to Evergreen again for hosting this, but I also want to give Evergreen a shout out for really helping the department in support of our application. So after hearing Kara speak, I'm seeing a lot of themes in the way that maybe some of these grants were selected, because a lot of the same things that are going on in Michigan, as far as good paying jobs, reducing emissions, those are the things that we've really prioritized here in Pennsylvania with our program as well. So the CPRG grant that Pennsylvania is receiving is going to be used to create a program that we're calling RISE PA, which is reducing industrial sector emissions in Pennsylvania. The reason that we chose to focus on industrial sector emissions in Pennsylvania is because it is our largest emissions sector. So when you look at the United States, number one is usually transportation, number two is electricity generation, and then the industrial sector is usually number three. But in the state of Pennsylvania, the industrial sector is our top sector of emissions. And that's because we make a lot of stuff in Pennsylvania. We make a lot of stuff that goes into other stuff. So think about concrete, steel. We have quarries, we have mines. Those types of activities really create a lot of emissions and a lot of carbon emissions specifically. So that's why when we did our plan, we really focused on that. We looked at everything, but our grant application really focused just on the industrial sector. So, what we're thinking about or what we'll be doing is really focusing on those communities, those fence line communities that are impacted by a lot of these activities. So if you've never been to Pennsylvania, much of the state is very, very green. We have a lot of forested land, but we also have some major cities, and we have a lot of smaller cities and a lot of development. And right within that development is where a lot of these activities are going on. So where people live is where a lot of these industrial activities are happening. So we'll be giving a bonus in our scoring when we go through this program. We'll be receiving applications for communities that are environmental justice. So there'll be a community benefit bonus. And similar to what Carol was saying with Michigan, we really focused on how we can really engage labor because in Pennsylvania, I think Michigan knows, I think a lot of the states who are doing a lot of this work knows that there's really a false choice when it comes to creating jobs or, protecting the environment. Protecting the environment actually does create jobs. Specifically addressing climate change really creates jobs. So we made sure that we worked that into our program design. And we sat down and we spoke with folks and experts in workforce development about how we can incentivize union labor being used. And we'll be providing a labor bonus through the program. But we're really focusing this effort on kind of a choose your own adventure kind of thing. So it's not specific, to one sector. We did as similar to Michigan, we did a lot of outreach. We asked folks, what type of projects would you like to fund? And we had so much diversity come back. So it's really a wide open program where we will be looking at emissions benefits, community benefits, job benefits, in figuring out how we deploy these dollars to assist these companies at being able to drive down their emissions. Trying to think if there's anything else that I really wanted to hit. I will just say this program is going to be operated out of our Energy Programs Office. It is located here in the Department of Environmental Protection. But Louis Crack, he is our infrastructure coordinator. He's really the designer of this program. So any questions on this? Louis, he's not busy enough. He's totally busy. He's so overworked. So that was a joke, but he's really the expert on this and the person that if we have specific questions, should be reaching out to.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you to Louis, your team, and thank you for your leadership. Thank you to Governor Shapiro for the work on RISE PA. We, alongside partners at the Ohio River Valley Institute and others, really enjoyed working with you on this. Thank you so much for everything you're doing, and congrats on the award. Excited to work with you to help make sure it's successful, and same with Michigan too. So Rachel, we'll turn it back to you to wrap up before we go to Q&A. So we'll conclude this portion and then we'll go to Q&A in a minute to conclude. But before we do that, Rachel, you started with the bird's eye view of the climate plans, the implementation process. What happens now for advocates and policymakers in states that got awards, in states and localities that didn't get awards? Where should people be turning their attention to? How do folks engage with this process as we go forward?
Yeah, love this so much as an advocate. So the immediate next step here for states that did get awarded and localities as well is to flesh out the details of those program designs so that programs can be well implemented on a good timeline in a way that, as we've been talking about, balances emissions reductions with high impact benefits for communities. That means that advocates will need to stay engaged. As their states and cities develop these plans and programs, policymakers in the priority climate action plan process, identified stakeholders. And so reaching back out to those stakeholders, keeping those stakeholders engaged, and as advocates, staying bought into the process, being able to give feedback as programs are both developed and as they're rolled out to make sure that they are high quality. And as we mentioned, there are hundreds of applications that did not get funded, both on the city and state level and through a variety of coalitions. The next step there will be to go after the other federal funds that remain available. So again, in the process of developing the priority climate action plans, 41 out of the 45 states that submitted plans identified funding either generally for their sectors that would help match CPRG funds, or some states did it specifically by each priority measure that they submitted. A lot of that funding is still available. So states and cities can go after that and work with communities to ensure that it's being well implemented. We know that the Biden-Harris administration has announced billions of dollars, not just through the Inflation Reduction Act, but through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And some of that money is going to be available for several years. So it's about, doing the work of getting that money drawn down. And as from an advocate perspective, it's also up to us to keep celebrating what is going well. This is a really exciting opportunity. Some of us have been working on it for quite a long time. And now that it's really happening, it's our job to celebrate it so that folks at the federal level understand we want more money. We want to keep being able to work on these things and that these programs have real benefits for real people. So making sure that like on the local level, that means that making sure that people in Pennsylvania and Michigan and New Orleans and New Jersey are applying for these hundreds of jobs that are going to become available, making sure that folks in the right communities get the information about them. We as advocates can help with all that. And state decision makers can do their part by making sure that these programs align with state and federal goals to really drive those emissions reductions down and meet our state and national targets. And we also know that the work is never done. And so achieving some of these program goals is going to mean that states or cities need to enact new laws or legislations, work on stretch codes, and set new standards. And so as advocates and policymakers, we can work together to accomplish those. So there is no shortage of what needs to come next.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel. Clear marching orders for all of us in the ecosystem, and should also point out that we have the comprehensive climate action plans to look forward to that are going to build on the initial priority climate action plans that are going to be done. So there's plenty of things for us to engage in as a community, policymakers, advocates, other stakeholders alike. So we're going to go take a couple of questions before we wrap. Just looking at our Q&A here, Secretary Shirley, there's a question here for you from WHYY. Sophia Schmidt is asking, what specific community benefits do you expect to come from the RISE PA program? And there's also, I think, a question from her about, are there any industrial facilities that are not going to be eligible? And I know that there's still some things to work out now that you have your award, but we'll turn it over to you to take that one.
Yeah, I was really thinking about that second one. I don't know that I can answer that at this time, because the industrial activity is so diverse. I can't think of any that would be specifically excluded off of the top of my head. As far as community benefits go, I think there are tremendous opportunities for community benefits. The first one being air quality. So air quality and healthy communities really go hand in hand. So as we're driving down carbon emissions, we'll also be driving down emissions of criteria pollutants. And those are the things that cause, ozone action days and asthma attacks. So we'll be cleaning up Pennsylvania's air quality through this grant program. The other benefit, though, is really in job creation, because we have included these provisions with regard to labor, and every job has to be paid prevailing wage, and they get an additional bonus if they use union contracted labor. They'll be using local labor in these communities where they're doing this work. So one job creates another job, creates another job. So there's significant money being invested in some of these fence line communities. They're going to have their air quality improved, but they're also going to have some serious investment into their local economies.
Thanks so much. Just to continue on with the questions here, and really excited to hear about how RISE PA is going to really benefit folks on the ground. Kara, Rachel, I think there's a specific question that we can answer in Michigan, and then Rachel, I don't know if you want to think about the broad strokes view. Are there labor standards attached to these grants and how you're going to implement these? Folks are wondering, and Rachel, maybe you can start. And I think there's a question about whether it varies by state and how labor standards, community benefits are being addressed. But I know Michigan and Pennsylvania are also organized labor is really key to and partnering with the labor movement and making sure that their strong labor standards is important for both of your administrations. So happy to start with Rachel and then turn it over to you both to wrap up with that.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'll keep it quick. Just that the climate pollution reduction grant implementation grant process did not require any labor standards, but we do know from EPA that community benefits, and specifically benefits to low income and disadvantaged communities, was heavily weighted as a consideration. So we do know that, as Jessica and Kara were saying, a theme here is benefits for communities, and many of the grant applications that were approved do specifically highlight that not only will there be job benefits, those will be targeted in disadvantaged communities. And so it is up to the state to determine what those standards are, but we do expect them to be high quality, good paying, family sustaining wage jobs. And as advocates, it's our job to make sure that they are. So again, I would say stay in contact in your state to make sure that as these jobs are getting developed, they meet those standards.
Yeah, and building off of that, it's always important for us in Michigan to really support union jobs that are good jobs and family sustaining jobs. So across the board, that's something we looked at, in last year's package of clean energy laws that I spoke about previously. One of the bills actually set some of the strongest standards in the country for clean energy projects around labor protection. So now every utility scale project that comes in, they have to pay at least a prevailing wage. They have to be willing to enter into project labor agreements. They have to focus on Department of Labor registered pre-apprenticeship programs, and a number of other actions were outlined within state law. So that's something across the board that we're prioritizing. We're still developing exactly what this is going to look like with Davis-Bacon requirements and others, but we're always looking to exceed requirements that are set by the federal level to make sure that we're really focusing on union jobs here in Michigan. And again, we really kind of model a lot of what we do after the U.S. Department of Labor's 8 Good Jobs principles, because that's something that is kind of consistent across the board and supported by our really diverse labor community here in Michigan.
Secretary Shirley, anything to add on the labor side from your perspective? I know labor's been at the table. The route is RISE PA has been developed.
Yeah, I think we're still, digging into everything that came back or is, in the process of coming back from EPA. But, everything that Kara said is spot on for Pennsylvania as well. I actually just wrote down, I want to read that legislation. I want to take a look at that. So this has been good for me even. But, it's really important for us, like I said, that we create those local jobs and support good paying, fair wages and family sustaining. I actually started my career at the Department of Labor and Industry in workforce development. So this is incredibly important for me and something that we were able to carry through to this application. And we'll be looking at how we might be able to deploy some of these types of requirements in some other programs that we have.
And Secretary, I'm happy to send you the legislation and a report that AFL put out that highlighted our programs as well as programs in Illinois and a few other states that they thought were model programs. So I'll send that your way.
Thank you.
Rachel, we're going to wrap up with you. I'm going to combine a couple of the final questions here. So folks are wondering, and we talked about this a little bit already, additional opportunities to fund implementation proposals that were not funded. There were at the state level, there were also local governments that spent a ton of time putting together their applications. And, as we talked about with Ali, the program was massively oversubscribed. What support can we provide to these communities? And where do we go from here to help these folks continue to move the ball forward in whatever way that we can?
Yeah, and I will say it is worth acknowledging that, applying for these federal grant applications is a heavy lift. And so to all the states and cities in particular, like that was a big effort. But it doesn't need to go to waste. As I mentioned before, there are a number of grant applications that are still open, that are cyclical. Over the next couple of years, as this money from the Inflation Reduction Act continues to be pumped out. And we also know that EPA in particular for their programs have set up technical assistance centers. So there's one in every region, every EPA region. And so when you do identify a project that works well for your community, you can reach out to EPA to get that additional support. And I do believe other agencies have some technical assistance as well. So there are still opportunities, and I would encourage, again, us as advocates to make sure that our cities carry forward this funding. Things like the environmental justice block grants applications are still open and taking applications right now, and a lot of those are flexible and can really be shaped by community needs as well. So I understand the level of effort was very, very high, but since the planning has already been done, let's try to get those plans put into action some kind of way.
And to your point, Rachel, let's go get another appropriation for the next phase of CPRG2. And I think philanthropy can play a role and advocates can play a role. There's tons of ways to keep this moving forward. Thank you to our speakers for staying a couple of minutes over. Evergreen has been thrilled to work on this program with both policymakers and advocates on the ground, the Biden-Harris administration. We were at the table lobbying for this to get it in the IRA alongside many partners. We've been thrilled to work on it since its inception and then really partner with states and advocates to see this through. And folks can learn more about all of the CPRG applications and what was funded both on the EPA's website, and then Evergreen has a CPRG program resource hub that is we're dropping in the chat. Folks have been sharing all of our materials throughout. We're going to have a YouTube recording of this, and please just reach out and stay engaged. As we talked about, we've come a long way, but we're really just at the starting line for a lot of this, and there's going to be a lot of work to do, both for in jurisdictions that got funding and those that didn't, to keep moving the ball forward and reducing carbon pollution in our communities and key sectors. So thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to everybody soon. Enjoy the rest of the day.